So as I think about old year, new year kind of stuff, I guess one of the first things that I think about is just the pressures that we have in life. I think about the struggles that I've had in the past year. I think about the struggles that I'm having right now, just the different issues and concerns in my life. And I look toward a new year, and on one hand, I'm so optimistic about just the future, and on the other hand, I have this sense of the pressures, and I have the sense of the concern, and the uncertainty is daunting. And so I ask myself, and I ask you tonight, as we kind of are confronted in a few hours with a brand new year and all that's going to come with it, what happens to you when the pressure comes? What happens to you when pressure comes in your vocation, in your work? What happens to you when you're in school and there's just, there's a pressure to do well and to achieve? What happens to you when financial pressures rear their ugly head? Or, in the past month, it seems so many people dealing with surgeries and just different health issues and different treatments. What happens when your health becomes a pressure and a weight in your life? What about relationship pressures? Strained marriages? Kids that are, making bad decisions. They're going the wrong way. All the stress that it causes. Yeah, these are the pressures of life. So as we think about these pressures of life, the pressures that we've had in the past year, the pressures that are in store for us in the next, I ask, how do you respond to pressure? Or how do you perform under pressure? Because one certainty that I have, and one certainty that I have for you, is that the new year is going to bring with it all kinds of things, but one thing that it will certainly bring is new pressures, new obstacles to overcome, new situations that we need to navigate. And even when we're expecting it, even when we're expecting that these new pressures are going to come, it always kind of seems to catch us off guard. Now, some of us prefer to think that the pressures that we feel in life kind of knock us out of character, right? I am who I am when I'm normal and things are going well, but then, when the anxiety rises, when the pressure comes, then, I start acting like somebody else, and that's not who I am. That's what we like to believe. But in reality, pressure is the great revealer of character. It exposes what we are living for and exposes what our hearts are anchored to. It exposes what or who we have put our trust in. And so, why is it that I mention pressure? Why is it that I think about pressure when I think about this old year, new year stuff? Why do I think about pressure when I read these verses? Because Isaiah was preaching and prophesying to a people that were under a great deal of pressure. Because Isaiah lived during the time of the Assyrian Empire, and I've mentioned that, I think, fairly recently. But the Assyrian Empire was powerful enough to threaten everybody in the ancient Near East when it was at the height of its power. And what did this mean? It meant that for God's people settled in this little territory between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, it was a time of uncertainty for them. Because you have this massive big brother just just looking at you and breathing on you, and you know that their intentions are bad. And so it's a time of uncertainty. But here's the tragic thing. It didn't need to be a time of uncertainty for them. And Isaiah's message, not just in chapter 40 here, but Isaiah's message, his greater message was over and over, don't trust in false idols. Don't trust in your own plans and your own schemes. Don't trust in military might or the strength of your cities or the smoothness of your infrastructure. Don't put your ultimate faith and trust in that. Don't even put your trust in political alliances. I know that it's tempting, but don't do that. Trust in your God. He is the only one who is great enough to relieve this pressure. He is the only one great enough to do away with these threats. Only He can deliver you. But as most of us know, the people didn't trust Isaiah, and the people didn't trust in God. They looked at the nations around them, the kingdoms and the empires, and they're thinking to themselves, okay, what gods do they worship? Maybe those gods could save us. How do they strategize for their security and their success? Maybe that's what we should be doing. When do they make alliances, and who do they make alliances with? When do they go on the offensive? Let's follow suit the best that we can. But Isaiah continues to say, no. Don't concern yourself with these things. When the pressure comes, trust in God. So Isaiah 40, these verses that we just read, provide us with two great truths. Truths that are going to serve us well if we heed them in the coming year. And both of them, and this is the beauty of it, both of them are these great reminders about who God is. And when we face uncertainty, and when we feel the pressure coming on, there is nothing more important that we can do than to remember who God is and what God is about. And so the first great truth that we find in the verses that we just read is this: only God is great enough to save us. I don't know how closely you were paying attention, but we go through at the beginning of our passage this whole litany of how amazing and huge God is. In verse 12, we are told something about the size of God. It says He can hold all the waters of the earth in the palm of His hand. Now, those of us with big hands, or those of us with extraordinarily flexible hands, maybe we can hold a tablespoon of water in the palm of our hand. Isaiah tells us that God can hold all the waters of the earth in His hand. The oceans of the world contain more than 340 quintillion gallons. He can hold that in His hand. And he talks about how God can measure the expanse of the heavens in the breadth of His hand. I don't know if he's talking about the breadth here or whether we can spread out our thumb and our little finger, but God can measure the heavens on His hand. Now understand, the universe stretches more than 30 billion light years. That's 200 sextillion miles. God can measure that in His hand. It says the dust of the earth He can hold in a basket. The earth weighs 6 sextillion metric tons. It talks about how God weighs the mountains and the hills on a scale. So we immediately are hit with this image, this picture of just the sheer size of God. Then in verses 13 and 14, we're introduced to the wisdom, the great wisdom of God. And these are in the form of questions. Who can understand the complex mind of the creator of the cosmos? I mean, we can barely understand the world that we live in. Scientists, even the most brilliant ones, have barely scratched the surface of the intricacies of creation. So who can understand the complex mind of the one who created all of it? And then who serves as counselor to the God who already knows everything? I mean, that's just a ridiculous, ridiculous question. God already knows everything. Who's going to tell him what his business should be? Who can instruct a perfectly righteous God about anything? About what is right? I mean, God is perfect. I mean, who of us can tell God, what's right and what's wrong? Who would give the author of knowledge any bit of new understanding? So we have the size of God, we have the wisdom of God. At verses 15 to 17, we have the power of God. It says the strongest nations, the greatest empires are as insignificant as dust, worthless and less than nothing compared to the power of God. Verses 18 to 20, the incomparableness of God. There is no other God and no one else who even comes close. No matter how much skill and no matter how much valuable material is put into an idol, it's still just a powerless waste of space and effort. I mean, the best thing somebody can hope for in constructing the perfect idol is that it won't fall over. Nothing and no one compares to our God. Verse 21, the position of God. It says, God sits enthroned above the circle of the earth. He spreads out the heavens like a tent to live in. And so there we get this sense of God being apart from creation. He kind of sits outside of it. He sits above it. But also, at the same time, because God spreads out the heavens like a tent, because he sits over the earth, there's at the same time this sense of God kind of being present in creation as well. So he's both outside and inside of creation. Verses 23 and 24, Isaiah tells us about the timelessness of God. People are born, people live their lives, people die, and it is less than the blink of an eye to God. No sooner are they planted and take root than they wither and die. But God stands forever. Finally, verses 25 and 26, Isaiah gives us a glimpse of the sovereignty of God. And these also are questions from God's own lips. It says, to whom will you compare me? Who is my equal? God brings out each and every star one by one. He calls them by name. And so this first part of our passage, I mean, it's just astounding. What a collection of images that Isaiah has compiled for us here. I mean, it's amazing. It's beyond our grasp. We can kind of get a sense of what Isaiah is talking about. We can kind of get a sense of what God is like. But even in getting that sense, we realize that we can't even begin to wrap our minds around it. Scott Jose summarizes it this way. He says, God, we are told, sits enthroned high above the circle of the earth. His perch is so lofty as to render us human beings as mere bugs scurrying around the ground. The entire canopy of space is stretched out by this same God as he handles the fabric of the cosmos the way a seamstress would handle a swatch of cloth. And when it comes to even the mightiest people on the planet, God is able to buy them and sell them with ease. Their earthly majesty and power mean nothing to God. With a wave of his hand, he is able to turn even the proudest and the strongest to dust. And so how do you respond to that? How does that make you feel? In his book, Faith and Doubt, John Ortberg quotes Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell says this, in the visible world, the Milky Way is a tiny fragment. Within this fragment, the solar system is an infinitesimal speck. And within that infinitesimal speck, our planet is a microscopic dot. And on this dot, tiny lumps of carbon and water crawl about for a few years until they are dissolved again into the elements of which they are compounded. He is talking about us. He is talking about human beings there. And so John Ortberg quotes Bertrand Russell, and then he says this: is it only me? Or is that the tiniest bit depressing? That we are so small, that we are so insignificant as to be just reduced to what we are made up of. But that's kind of what Isaiah is doing to us in the first part of chapter 40. Because talking about the majesty and just the hugeness and the majestic work of God makes us feel small. And so the way that Isaiah begins this passage, if we just let it stand alone, doesn't really give us much comfort at all. If anything, it makes us feel small and insignificant and unnoticed, frankly. I mean, it makes no difference to me how great and powerful God is if I have no relationship to him. But here lies the irony in this passage. Because within the span of only a few verses, Isaiah has no difficulty whatsoever transitioning from the loftiness and majesty of God to the deep intimacy of God as well. Which brings us to the second great truth of this passage. And this is the one that kind of binds it together and makes it so comforting and powerful for us coming into the new year. And that is this: only God loves us deeply enough to save us. So there's this great, big, powerful, wise, awesome God, and he cares about me. And he cares about you. And that's what we read in verses 27 to 31, where it says, why do you say, O Jacob, and complain, O Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord. My cause is disregarded by my God. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord, those who hope in this great God, he will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles, will run and not grow weary, will walk and not be faint. So there's this great, big, powerful, wise, awesome God, and he cares about you, and he cares about me. And how do we know that he cares? How do we know that he loves us? Because he sent his son into the world to die a criminal's death on a cross for you and for me. This great, big, powerful, wise, awesome God binds himself to us in covenant relationship. That's what we've been talking about leading up to the holidays. He binds himself to us in his own death and in his own blood. And so, brothers and sisters, do you not know? Have you not heard? God is not too great to care about us. In fact, he is so great that he does care for us. And as we think about these verses, as we think about this passage, as we enter a new year, we are invited to imagine, what if God used his infinite greatness and power for our benefit? Well, we don't have to imagine, because this is the reality. After all, is there anything the Father would not do for those that the Son gave his life for? And that is the assurance that we can bring into a new year and be confident. Be confident in the right place and in the right person, our God through his Son, Jesus Christ. Let's pray.